Without emotional intelligence, you will not have the clarity of mind to respond intelligently. You will not have the clarity of mind to respond properly. Good morning. For past couple days, I've been having some health issues, and I haven't been able to get to sleep, or rather haven't been able to get very good sleep. And then on top of that, I typically wake up at about 4:30. It's going to be a wonderful day. It's cold, but I'm not cold, so I don't have to like start up the car or anything to get heat. Like, the clothes are keeping me warm enough right now. But I do not want to go outside and make coffee. So I'm going to try to do as much of the coffee making process here before I go outside to finish the process. Yeah, I don't want to go outside. It's 21 degrees out right now. You know, it's funny. I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but in these parts, it's the coldest in the morning. Oh boy. Now, after all these years of being a coffee drinker, I still get excited about that first cup of coffee. Yeah. Yesterday, I was on the computer all day, on the computer and on the phone with customer support all day and into the evening. And then, of course, I had to stop. Yesterday might have been the first day in a long while that I didn't get to post anything. Now, minus the health issues, some injuries, some health issues, it's a perfect morning. More sleep would have been nice. You know, it's funny. I think I took like a day or two off. Yeah, there's no such thing, because then you just make up for it when you go back to work, you know, by not taking breaks and stuff like that. About a month ago, Bob Wells and Susann made a video regarding self-defense for Nomads, which is right here. I wanted to say that his opening and a lot of the stuff that he said in that video is really good. I mean, for not being an expert, he really drew upon some very important points. And those points are: your greatest self-defense weapon is up here. Now, this video is not a critique of Bob Wells and Susann and the information that they provided, but rather an addendum, or an addendum, I think that's how you say it. So yeah, when situational awareness fails and you now have to make the decision to fight, or if it's not even a decision, you just find yourself being attacked, then there are things that you want to take into consideration. Of course, one of the things that's really critical to develop is the skill to fight or flight. Having control over your fight and flight skills is vital. And sometimes there's a combination of fighting and flighting. Before I go any further, I should probably elaborate on my qualifications. I've been a lifelong martial arts instructor. I've taught military and law enforcement. I've had a lot of training in firearm safety and tactical training. I'm a Wing Chun Sifu, and I've been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since 1994. And not to mention, my greatest childhood heroes were Kwai Chang Caine from Kung Fu, and of course, the great Billy Jack. Those are probably my greatest qualifications. I first started training in martial arts and fighting when I was about 4 years old. My uncle, who was a Green Beret, had initially trained me when I was just a kid. And because I'm a dark-skinned person that doesn't always stay in Hawaii, I was raised in the South in the 60s in Mississippi. As a kid and all throughout my life, I've had a unproportional amount of altercations in my life. And not to mention, when you're an instructor, every day you're having your students and people off the streets challenging you. So the first thing I want to add is, if you do not ever want to get into a fight, if you don't ever want to suffer from an altercation, then you definitely should train in martial arts. Train in Wing Chun. Wing Chun is the synthesis of all the martial arts that came before it. Wing Chun is the synthesis of everything that works. Wing Chun fulfills the axiom of a smaller, weaker person defeating a stronger, larger, aggressive opponent. All martial arts strive to use your opponent's aggressive against them. However, Wing Chun is the only one that has achieved that. And furthermore, Wing Chun is purely self-defensive. It really does not work as an offensive martial art. That's why you don't see it a lot in sport fighting. Wing Chun uses emotional control techniques and basic physiology structure, so anyone can do this. Without emotional control, you will not be able to control your reaction to an attack. Every fighter knows this. Now, I believe I did make this video before, but I'm making it again. I'm going to reiterate what Bob said, because I think that's the most important point of his video, which is, if you're going to use a weapon, then you have to train with that weapon. Now, I'm going to extend that by saying, if you're going to take the time to train with a weapon, then you are best suited to simply train in Wing Chun. It takes about 20 minutes a day, and you'll get plenty of exercise and health benefits while you're doing so. This is not going to happen by training with a weapon. I'm going to relate a quick story. At least a handful of times I've been attacked. In all the years I've been attacked with guns and knives, I've always had to respond with my hands, with bare hands, what's called open-handed. Your hands and your feet and your brain, your emotional fortitude, and your hands and your feet are always available. So as long as you train those things accordingly, you'll be much more safe than you would if you rely on a weapon. Now, I've said this before, looking at things in a dualistic way. There are two sorts of advice that you give. There's weak advice and there's strong advice. Let me explain. There is advice that you give to people that are of strong mind and body, and there's advice that you give to people that are of weak mind and body. Of course, the most sound advice would be to create a strong mind and body connection, right? However, that's not always possible. We all fall ill, injured, sick, and so both sets of advice are vital. Really, if you're of weak mind and body, then your first plan of action should be to do something every day in order to strengthen your emotional intelligence and your physical well-being, your fitness. As a Wing Chun instructor, I've trained kids, I've trained the handicapped, I've trained a lot of women. Wing Chun is the martial art for humanity. Wing Chun was invented by women. I really don't understand why more people don't train in Wing Chun. It's the pathway to our humanity and to a peaceful future. To really understand the dynamic of someone attacking another person, you have to understand the psychology that's involved. One of the main factors involved in fighting is uncertainty. It's usually a person that's uncertain of the outcome of what's going to happen that causes this friction. The uncertainty of love, the uncertainty of money, the uncertainty of stability, of security. A quick story. Prior to getting sufficient firearm training, I used to have nightmares regarding firearms, misfires, non-firing, stuff like that. Well, it turns out those were very legitimate concerns. If you pull out a firearm and it jams on you, you're in big trouble. You have to have enough training with a firearm to actually experience these things and then go through the motions of clearing the firearm, etc. I also used to have these dreams prior to taking martial art training serious. I have these dreams where I would get into fights, and yeah, it was never a pleasant dream. Once I got sufficient training in hand-to-hand combat, once I got sufficient training in firearms, I never had any nightmares after that. So not only can weapons be used against you, or bad martial art training be used against you, but these things can also give you a false sense of security. Also understand that a weapon may very well beget a weapon. And that weapon, whatever weapon you choose, that weapon can be taken from you and used against you. That's what I usually do. But having a false sense of security is very dangerous. It could make you behave in a way that could get you seriously injured or killed. Now, here's another thing that every fighter knows, and that is this. In most cases, I will run away and do anything I can to avoid a confrontation. And this is because I know what the outcome is going to be. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be nice. So you would think, as a martial artist and as a guy that's been in a lot of fights, that I would, put myself in harm's way. No, absolutely the opposite. I really work hard to keep myself out of harm's way. Now, here's another thing I wanted to touch on. If you are a person of color, a male person of color, and you are carrying a weapon, this could be a huge liability and could also cost you your life. I should also state that there have been more than a few occasions where I've actually allowed the person to hit me, knowing that it wasn't going to cause any injury. And this is actually techniques that they teach to activists and protesters, which is passive resistance. Then, in fact, you could even say Wing Chun is the supreme art of passive resistance. Understand the physiology here. The person attacking is expending much more energy than the person that defends. That is, as long as you understand how to properly defend yourself. One of my favorite animals to draw upon is the honey badger. A honey badger's only so big, right? Honey badger isn't a big animal. But a honey badger, well, just look up what a honey badger can do. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but let me tell you, you cannot fake being willing to fight. And the will to fight comes from the appreciation of fighting, of training in martial arts. I'm not talking about an appreciation for UFC or sport fighting. No. I'm talking about an appreciation for dealing with direct confrontation. So there's a duality there. On one hand, avoid confrontation at all costs. But on another hand, if you are forced into confrontation, then you must be able to appreciate it. And I think this one's an easy one to understand if you kind of look at it like this. We all like to have sex, but that doesn't mean you're just going to jump into bed with anybody, right? But when you're in the throes of love, then you must appreciate it, right? So sport fighting really is somewhat of a false representation of actual fighting. And in fact, it's probably worth noting that in America, we have more of a culture of killing and genocide than we actually have of fighting. So again, I want to emphasize what Bob Wells had stated, and I want to clarify as well, and that is situational awareness and training is key. However, there's something even more important. Regardless of what martial art technique you know, regardless of what weapon you choose or do not choose, the number one thing that is going to help you in a self-defense situation is emotional intelligence. You don't have to take this from me. You could just look it up on Google, look up emotional intelligence, look it up on YouTube, emotional intelligence. I'll just say that Wing Chun, the martial art that I have learned and trained in for many, many years now, is the best key to emotional intelligence. However, it's not the only one, so check it out. Without emotional intelligence, you will not have the clarity of mind to respond intelligently. You will not have the clarity of mind to respond properly. Responding to a crisis such as being assaulted, it requires emotional stability. It requires emotional control. It requires emotional fortitude. It requires emotional intelligence. My website, SifuZ.com, is all about developing emotional and physical intelligence, the best self-control in the world. But again, there are many websites out there. There are many people. I know a lot of times communication is about personality. So there are many personalities out there talking about the benefits of emotional intelligence, also called EQ. And here's a great thing. As opposed to IQ, which you're born with, EQ is something that you can actually change. So if you have a low EQ, you can actually train yourself and gain a higher EQ. Without the skill of emotional EQ, again, no martial art, no weapon is really going to do you of any good. With emotional control and emotional intelligence comes the ability to then use whatever martial art or whatever weapon. So here's a great example. If you use a firearm, let's say, a gun, anything that projects something, right? If you use any projectile type weapon, you have to have the emotional control and the fortitude in order to point and stay on point and hit what you're aiming at. If you do not have emotional control and fortitude, you'll be shaking. There's little to no chance you're actually going to hit what you're aiming at because you don't have the emotional control to just, back in the Old West when the cowboys would have their fights, it was noted that the best gunslingers weren't actually fast. They were just calm, very controlled. Now, here's another thing that you should look into in terms of self-defense, and that is 99% of the attacks that happen could have been avoided if the ego was dealt with. Let me explain. I see people all the time, men and women alike, getting into situations that could very easily be seen as threatening. And I think a lot of times people go into these situations because their ego says, I'm not going to let this situation or these people intimidate me. Our egos can really get us into trouble and have us confronting things that we don't necessarily need to confront. Of course, a gross example of this would be going into a bar, going into any sort of place where a fight or aggression is prevalent. This video is way longer than I intended, and again, it's the second video response to Bob Wells' video. Another thing that Bob had said in the beginning of his video is making the choice to fight or to just lay down. Now, I think that the way that was said implied that lying down would not be a good choice. And let me tell you, in the animal kingdom and in our culture, submitting can be the best thing to do. Even if you can beat the person, submitting can sometimes be the best thing that you can do. I think the best word in English is called to acquiesce, something that I don't think Americans really like to do a lot of. So one last recap. First and foremost, emotional intelligence. Develop emotional intelligence. Do it over at SifuZ.com or look it up online. Develop emotional intelligence. 2, situational awareness. Develop situational awareness. 3, control that ego. Don't get into situations that you could easily avoid. Beyond that, an understanding of hand-to-hand combat is vital for self-defense. And understand, in almost all scenarios, weapons are best suited for being offensive, for assaulting, not for defending. Again, with all the firearms training and tactical training that I've had, it's very clear that firearms are best for assaulting, not for self-defense. And I would really extend that to any weapon. Weapons are good for assaulting, not for defending. We're going to have the responses. What about wild animals and whatnot? I've hiked over 2,000 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. I've run into a lot of wildlife, mountain lions, bears, rattlesnakes. Not once did a firearm come into play, and I stand here today. I have been attacked and assaulted many times with firearms and weapons. I have never responded in kind with a firearm or a weapon, and I stand before you today. I think the confusion lies in people think that preemptively assaulting someone is self-defense. It is not. We know this through many, many court cases. Yes, preemptively assaulting someone rarely holds up in court. Of course, if you're in the good old boy network, you're exempt from this, but I'm just talking about us regular folk. However, America is a gun culture, and I'm part of that culture. To that extent, I some time ago created a YouTube channel and a blog called Picking a Daisy. The blog is pickingadaisy.wordpress.com, and the channel youtube.com/@CaliAir. Now, this is not a firearm channel. I do not feature firearms on this channel. I feature children's BB guns, and I really feel that the Daisy BB gun is one, historically, an incredible thing. It's an incredible part of Americana. Now, a lot of people also don't realize that the Daisy BB gun was used to train our troops in World War I, World War II, all the way up into the Vietnam War. They were used for training our troops. In fact, the BB guns that the kids grew up with in the early 1900s were probably responsible for why Americans did so well when they entered into World War I, because the BB lobs much more than, let's say, a pellet or a firearm. It lobs. And so lobbing your bullets into the trenches was the way to go. Now, I mistakenly got into the Daisy BB guns because I had moved into an urban area and I wanted to get more trigger time in. I had moved out of the country where I had my own shooting range, and so I wanted to get more trigger time. And pellet guns were actually problematic and were alerting the neighbors, so I needed something really quiet. The Daisy BB gun came into play. My God, I was able to, a Daisy BB gun, you could load about 500 BBs into there. You know how much trigger time you can get in with 500 BBs? Now listen, BB guns aren't any good for killing varmints or hunting or anything like that, but they're just great for plinking. Now, the ballistics are not the same with BB guns than with firearms or even pellet guns. However, the battery of arms, trigger control, muzzle control, all that stuff is right there with the Daisy BB gun. And in America, with a gun culture, I think it's also a great tool for kids so you can acclimate them to a gun without the danger of a firearm. But there's still enough danger in there where, you know, they can poke an eye out, right? The only Daisy that someone has died from was actually not a BB gun, but a pellet gun that also shot BBs. And that's a pump action that I'll be featuring. I'll actually be featuring the very first variant of that BB gun, or pellet gun rather, on my channel over at Cali Air. But first, I'll be featuring this BB gun right here. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to go over to my BB gun channel on YouTube at Cali Air to see the up and coming video for this. All right, I definitely got to stop this video. This is stuff I could go on for hours about, and I do over at SifuZ.com. If you've got anything out of this video, give it a like. If you haven't done so already, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. I want to thank all the subscribers over at Zeekers Caravan, and thank you to all the subscribers over at Chun. Check out my music on YouTube at Uncertain Music. I'll be putting together an emotional control playlist over at the Chun channel, so go check that out. Of course, thank you to all of my Patreon subscribers over at Sifu Z. Integrity Radio is going to be revived after a year hiatus, so there's a lot coming up, man. I'm too old for all this. I should be convalescing on the beach in Hawaii. Man.